Iris Webb had studied predators her entire life. She knew how they moved, how they thought, how their eyes tracked prey even when their bodies stayed perfectly still. She had walked among lions in African preserves and swam near sharks in Earth's deepest oceans. Fear, she had learned, was just information waiting to be understood. The shuttle docked with Research Station Olympus without ceremony. Through the viewport, she could see New Perth spinning below, its oceans catching light from the distant sun. 83 years ago, humanity had met the Galactic Assembly for the first time. Now humans lived on 40 worlds, all of them granted by the Assembly's generous permission. Iris had never questioned that permission before. Administrator Pohl met her in the docking bay. He was Varani, one of the Assembly's founding species. His skin shimmered with patterns that shifted based on mood, and right now those patterns were tight and controlled. "Dr. Webb, welcome. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Long," Iris said, hefting her research cases. "But productive. I reviewed all the files you sent. Not all of them." Pohl's patterns flickered briefly. "Some information requires proper clearance levels. You'll receive additional briefings as necessary." They walked through corridors that curved with the station's rotation. Other researchers passed by, mostly non-human. A few humans nodded at Iris but didn't stop to chat. The station felt quiet in a way that made her skin prickle. "Your subject has been in containment for 60 years, Pohl said. In that time, 47 researchers have attempted to study him. Most lasted less than a month. Why? Fear. Disgust. One claimed nightmare so severe she required psychological intervention." Pohl stopped at a security checkpoint. The dire sept nearly destroyed galactic civilization 400 years ago. They were apex predators without natural restraint. The Assembly had no choice but to act. Iris placed her hand on the scanner. "You mean genocide?" Pohl's patterns tightened further. "Pacification. There's a difference." "Is there?" The door slid open. Beyond it lay another corridor, this one lined with quantum-locked cells. All of them were empty except the last one. Iris could see something massive inside, but the containment field distorted the view. "He is the last of his kind," Pohl said quietly. "When he dies, the dire sept will be extinct. The Assembly sees no reason to extend his life artificially, but until natural death occurs, we study what we can." He gestured to the cell. "Your job is to understand his psychology. How does an apex predator think? What made his species so dangerous? These answers will help us identify similar threats in the future." "Threats like humanity?" The question came out before Iris could stop it. Pohl's patterns swirled into something that might have been amusement. "Humans are not threats, Dr. Webb. You're probationary members of the Assembly, still learning your place in civilized space." He handed her a datapad. "Your security codes. You may begin observations tomorrow. I suggest you rest first." He left without another word. Iris stood alone in the corridor, staring at the distorted shape behind the quantum field. She should have gone to her quarters. Should have followed Pohl's advice. Instead, she stepped closer to the cell. "Administrator Pohl believes I can't see through the field distortion," a voice said. It was deep and resonant, speaking perfect English through a translator. "He's wrong. I've had 60 years to learn every flaw in this cage." Iris's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "You can see me?" "Every detail. You bite your lower lip when you're thinking. You carry yourself like someone who's been afraid before and decided it wasn't useful." The shape shifted. "You're human. They've sent me a human this time. Interesting. My name is Iris Webb." "I know. I heard Pohl say it." The creature moved closer to the field, and for the first time Iris could make out details. Scales that caught light like dark metal. Eyes that glowed faintly with their own luminescence. "I am called Strand. Once I was called Strand the Evening Sky Who Remembers Fire, but that was before the clipping. Before the cage. Now just Strand. The clipping. My wings. They cut them when they captured me." Strand's voice carried no emotion, but somehow that made it worse. "A dire sept without wings is like a human without legs. We survive, but we don't live." Iris stepped even closer. She could see him clearly now. He was enormous, easily 5 meters long, with wings that hung at wrong angles from his back. Scars covered his body in geometric patterns. Torture, she realized. Or experimentation. Maybe both. "You shouldn't be here yet," Strand said. "Not without clearance. Not without preparation. Pohl will be angry. Let him be angry." Something that might have been laughter rumbled from the cell. "The humans have spirit, at least." That's what I've heard. You've only been in the galaxy for 8 decades, and already you annoy the Assembly with questions. Is that why they sent me here? To see how I react to you? Perhaps. Strand tilted his massive head. Or perhaps they genuinely believe you can learn something useful. Humans are still naive enough to believe the Assembly's stated purposes match their real ones. What do you mean? You'll learn, or you won't. Either way, it will be interesting to watch. Strand moved back into the shadows of his cell. Go rest, Iris Webb. Tomorrow your real education begins. Iris walked to her quarters in a daze. The room was small but functional. A bed, a desk, a viewport showing the stars. She sat at the desk and pulled up the files on the dire sept again. Everything in them described monsters. Brutal conquerors who burned worlds and slaughtered billions. The Assembly had barely survived the war. Pacification had been necessary, but Strand hadn't seemed like a monster. He'd seemed tired. And worse, he'd seemed intelligent in a way the files never mentioned. They described the dire sept as if they were animals acting on instinct. But Strand spoke with purpose, with understanding, with something that looked suspiciously like wisdom. Iris pulled up Earth history files. She read about her own species' wars, about the atrocities humans had committed against each other. If aliens had judged humanity by its worst moments, what would they have concluded? Would they have seen monsters too? She fell asleep at her desk, and in her dreams she flew with broken wings through an empty sky. The next morning, Iris received her full briefing. Pol showed her video feeds of Strand from decades past. In the earliest recordings, he was feral, attacking anything that came near his cell. But as years passed, he grew calmer, more controlled. The files called it behavioral degradation, but Iris saw something else. She saw someone learning to endure. You may begin direct observation today, Pol said. Keep sessions under 1 hour. Record everything. And Dr. Webb, do not anthropomorphize the subject. He is not human. He thinks differently, values differently. Your empathy is a weakness he will exploit. Iris nodded, but she was already wondering who was really being warned. When she entered the observation corridor, Strand was waiting. You came back, good. I thought yesterday might have frightened you away. I told you. I study predators. I understand fear, do you? Do you really? Strand pressed against the quantum field. Up close, his scales were beautiful, like oil on water. Fear is prey mind. It's the rabbit knowing the wolf approaches. But you're not prey, Iris Webb, neither am I. So what should we fear? Iris thought about that. About the Assembly's power. About humanity's probationary status. About cages that weren't always visible. Each other? She offered. No, Strand said softly. Those who put us in cages and call it civilization. And something in Iris's understanding of the universe shifted, just slightly, like the first crack in old glass. 3 weeks into her assignment, Iris realized she looked forward to her sessions with Strand more than anything else in her life. Her official reports to Pol were clinical and brief, but her personal notes filled volumes. She was supposed to be studying an alien predator. Instead, she felt like she was learning to see the galaxy with new eyes. Tell me about your homeworld, Strand said during their 5th session. He had taken to lying near the front of his cell, his massive body coiled in a way that somehow suggested relaxation. I've studied 43 species in my captivity, but humans still confuse me. We're a mess of contradictions, Iris admitted. She sat on the floor outside his cell now, legs crossed. Pol had stopped complaining about her lack of professional distance. Or maybe he'd simply given up. We create beautiful art and terrible weapons. We love fiercely and hate just as strongly. The dire sept were the same. Strand's eyes glowed a little brighter. The Assembly records call us monsters, but they never mention the songs we sang or the poetry we carved into cliffsides. They reduced us to teeth and claws. Tell me about the songs. So he did. Strand's voice changed when he spoke of his people, becoming something almost musical. He described crystal cities that grew from living stone and schools where young deer sept learned to dance on the wind. He told her about philosophers who debated the nature of consciousness and artists who painted with fire itself. We were warriors too, he said. I won't lie about that. Every dire sept trained to fight from the moment their wings could carry them. But we were warriors who chose when to fight. Warriors who understood that strength meant protecting the weak, not crushing them. Iris recorded everything, knowing Pole would redact most of it. She'd learned quickly that her reports went through heavy censorship. Any information that painted the Diresept as sympathetic disappeared before reaching official archives. It made her wonder what other histories had been rewritten. "What started the war?" she asked. Strand was quiet for a long time. "The Assembly came to my world with an offer. Join them, follow their laws, accept their protection." It sounded reasonable. But their protection meant giving up our sovereignty. It meant allowing Assembly monitors in our government. It meant restricting our technology, our exploration, our growth. Strand shifted, his broken wings rustling. "We said no. We said we would trade, would talk, would coexist. But we would not submit." And that was enough for war? The Assembly doesn't accept refusal well. They told us we were dangerous. That uncontrolled apex predators threatened galactic stability, that for the good of civilization we needed to be managed. His voice hardened. We fought back. And for that they erased us. Iris felt cold. Humanity received the same offer. 83 years ago. I know. I've been watching your species through the reports they forced me to review. You said yes where we said no. Strand looked directly at her. Do you regret it? Did she? Iris had grown up believing first contact was humanity's greatest triumph. Earth had been welcomed into a peaceful galactic community. Humans now lived on 40 worlds, had access to advanced technology, enjoyed protection from hostile forces. What was there to regret? But lately she'd noticed things. Human ships couldn't develop faster than light drives without Assembly approval. Human colonies couldn't establish governments without Assembly oversight. Human scientists couldn't research certain fields because the Assembly deemed them dangerous. Every freedom came with a leash. I don't know anymore, she said honestly. Lieutenant Hayes found her in the station's small garden that evening. He was one of only 3 humans on Olympus, assigned to security. They'd barely spoken before, but now he sat beside her without asking. You're asking dangerous questions, he said, staring at the artificial sky above them. How would you know what I'm asking? Because Pole is worried. When administrators worry, security hears about it. Hayes was quiet for a moment. There are others like you. Humans who see the cage we're in. Iris turned to look at him. What are you saying? Nothing. Not yet. Just be careful. The Assembly has ways of handling dissent. He stood to leave, then paused. Your predecessor, Dr. Chen. She didn't leave because of nightmares. She left because she asked too many questions about why the Diresept were really exterminated. Her career never recovered. After he left, Iris sat in the garden for hours, thinking. She thought about Strand's broken wings and Chen's broken career. She thought about humanity's 40 worlds and all the worlds they couldn't visit without permission. She thought about freedom and what it really meant. Her next session with Strand began with a question she'd been afraid to ask. Could you escape? Strand's laugh echoed through the corridor. Finally, I wondered when you'd think of that. That's not an answer. The quantum locks are sophisticated, Strand said, but they're maintained by Varani technicians who follow predictable routines. The guard rotations are consistent. The power grid has a 6-second gap during system transfers at 300 hours every 3rd day. He tilted his head. I've had 60 years to study every detail of this cage. What do you think? I think you could have left decades ago. And won where? I'm the last Diresept. The Assembly wiped out my species. Where would I go that they wouldn't find me? Strand moved closer to the field. Besides, my escape would serve a purpose I don't wish to serve. What purpose? The Assembly is watching humanity carefully. You're the newest species to join, and you have concerning tendencies. Aggression, curiosity, independence. If I escaped, they would blame human security failures. They would use it as evidence that humanity cannot be trusted with important responsibilities. Strand's eyes dimmed. My escape would be your species' death sentence. Iris felt her world tilt again. You stay in this cage to protect humanity? I stay in this cage because I have nothing left to protect except the possibility that someone somewhere might break free of the Assembly's grip. Strand settled back into his coils. Your species is young, Iris. Young enough to still question. Old enough to maybe do something about it. I've met 47 researchers. Most were assembly species, long since pacified into obedience. The few independent species left learned to never ask questions. But humans ask questions. Constantly. Annoyingly. Dangerously. For the first time, Strand sounded almost amused. The Assembly hasn't decided what to do with you yet. You could be shaped into compliant members. Or you could be the next threat to be pacified. Iris accessed the restricted archives that night. It took Hayes' security codes and 3 hours of careful searching, but she found what she was looking for. Records of 12 species the Assembly had pacified throughout history. All of them had been apex predators or species that refused total integration. All of them had been reduced to remnants or entirely eliminated. The dire sept weren't unique. They were just the most recent. She found more. Records of species that had accepted Assembly membership and slowly transformed into shadows of themselves. Their populations controlled. Their governments managed. Their innovations restricted. Safe, protected, and utterly purposeless. Was that humanity's future? Comfortable irrelevance? You're learning, Strand said the next day, before she'd even sat down. How can you tell? You move differently, like someone carrying new weight. He studied her with those luminous eyes. Knowledge is heavy, isn't it? Ignorance is so much lighter. I found the records. All 12 species you mentioned. Did you find the pattern? Iris nodded slowly. The Assembly doesn't maintain peace through cooperation. They maintain it through control. Any species strong enough to resist gets eliminated. Any species that submits gets neutered. And humanity sits precisely between those two options, not yet committed to either path. Strand lowered his head until it was level with hers, only the quantum field between them. The Assembly is waiting to see which you choose. Submission or resistance. Life as pets or death as threats. That's not a choice. That's a trap. Yes, Strand said softly. Welcome to galactic civilization, Iris Webb. Population. Everyone who knows they're caged and everyone who pretends they're free. She wanted to argue, wanted to find some flaw in his logic. But she couldn't. Everything she'd learned in the past weeks supported his conclusion. The Assembly's power wasn't built on cooperation. It was built on systematic elimination of any species strong enough to refuse it. What would you do? She asked. If you were human? If you saw the trap? Strand considered that. The dire sept chose to fight. It cost us everything. But at least we died free. He paused. Though perhaps there's a third option we never considered. What? Proof. Evidence that the Assembly's methods are not about protection but about power. Evidence that cannot be denied or buried. Strand's eyes brightened. The Assembly maintains control through carefully constructed narratives. They're peacekeepers, protectors, the wise elders guiding dangerous children. If that narrative collapsed, if other species saw the truth, Iris breathed, understanding blooming, they might question their own cages. They sat in silence, two beings from different worlds, both beginning to understand that neither of them was truly imprisoned by quantum locks or security protocols. They were imprisoned by carefully maintained lies, and lies could be shattered with truth. If someone was brave enough to speak it, Iris started seeing surveillance everywhere. Not the obvious kind, the cameras in corridors and monitoring stations, the subtle kind, the way Pole always knew which archives she accessed, how her communications to Earth took days longer than they should, the pattern of which human researchers got prestigious assignments and which ones quietly disappeared from academic circles. Humanity wasn't on probation with the Assembly. Humanity was on trial. She met Hayes in the garden again, in the early hours when most of the station slept. They'd developed a routine of accidental meetings that weren't accidental at all. He brought data chips that couldn't be traced. She brought questions that couldn't be asked openly. "How many humans know?" Iris asked, skipping any pretense of casual conversation. Hayes stared at the artificial stars. "About the truth? Maybe 10,000 scattered across the colonies. About the resistance? Fewer. A few hundred actively working to gather evidence and allies." Resistance. The word felt dangerous just to say. Against the entire Galactic Assembly. Not against. Just outside of. Beyond their control. Hayes pulled out a data chip, held it where cameras couldn't see. "There are other species that regret accepting Assembly membership. Not many, but some. Species that remember what they were before pacification. They share information quietly. Stories of what they've lost. Stories aren't proof. No. That's why what you're doing matters." Hayes slipped the chip into her hand. "That creature you're studying, he's living proof of what the Assembly does to threats, but getting his testimony out, that's nearly impossible. Everything on this station is monitored." Iris closed her fingers around the chip. "What's on this?" "Contact protocols. If you need to reach the resistance network, if things go wrong." Hayes stood to leave. "Pol is getting nervous. He's requested additional oversight of your research. Someone's coming from Assembly headquarters next month to evaluate your progress." After he left, Iris plugged the chip into her personal terminal behind 7 layers of encryption. The files inside were sparse but damning. Names of species that had been pacified, population numbers before and after Assembly intervention, technology restrictions placed on member species, and at the bottom, a single question in plain text. What is humanity willing to sacrifice for real freedom? She didn't know the answer yet. "You look troubled," Strand observed during their next session. "More than usual." "The Assembly is sending an evaluator. They want to assess my research. They want to assess you," Strand corrected. "Your research is just the excuse. They're determining whether humans can be trusted or whether you'll need to be managed more carefully." Iris sat against the wall opposite his cell. "Hayes told me about a resistance, humans and others who want out of the Assembly's control." "I know. I've been listening to your conversations through the ventilation systems. Sound carries remarkably well in this station." Strand shifted, his scales catching light. "The resistance is brave, but bravery without leverage is just martyrdom." "Then we need leverage. You need proof. Undeniable evidence that the Assembly's peaceful facade hides systematic oppression." Strand moved closer to the quantum field. "I can give you that. My memories, my testimony, the true history of the Dire Sept War. Everything I witnessed and everything they did to my people. How? They monitor everything. There's a way. One they can't monitor because it requires my cooperation." Strand tapped the side of his head with one clawed finger. "Neural data extraction. Every thought, every memory encoded directly from brain to storage. But it has to be done during active consciousness transfer. That's..." Iris paused, understanding hitting her like cold water. "That requires dying. You'd have to die during the extraction for it to work." "Yes. No. Absolutely not. I won't kill you for information." Strand's laugh was bitter. "You won't be killing me, Iris. I'm already dead. Have been for 60 years. This," he gestured at his scarred body, his clipped wings, "is just the corpse taking time to stop moving." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true." Strand settled into his coils. "Listen to me. The wing clipping they did when they captured me wasn't just symbolic. It damaged my core physiology. Dire Sept wings aren't just for flight. They regulate temperature, blood flow, neural chemistry. Without them functioning properly, we deteriorate slowly. I have perhaps 6 months before system failure." Iris felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You knew? All this time?" "Of course I knew. So does Pol. That's why they're rushing your research. They want whatever data they can extract before I expire naturally and they lose the opportunity." Strand's eyes dimmed slightly. "But if I die, on my terms, transferring my consciousness voluntarily, the neural extraction would be complete. Perfect. every memory preserved. And you'd be gone. I've been gone since they destroyed my world. This would at least give my death meaning. Strand moved until his head was close to the field. 6 months from now, I die alone in this cage, and the assembly buries everything I knew, or I die helping to free species I'll never meet. Which death sounds more like living? Iris couldn't answer. She left the session early, ignoring Pohl's questions, and spent the rest of the day in her quarters staring at nothing. The choice Strand offered was impossible. Accept his death for tactical advantage or let him die meaninglessly while humanity stayed ignorant. But was there a third option? She worked through the night, pulling up every file on neural extraction she could access. The technology was Varani, highly restricted, used primarily for preserving the consciousness of important assembly leaders. The process required specialized equipment and perfect conditions. It had never been done on a dire sept before. More importantly, it had never been done covertly. You're thinking too loudly, Strand said the next day. I can practically hear the gears turning. If we do this, if I agree, it can't be here. Not on this station. Iris had barely slept, but her mind was clear. Pohl will never approve the procedure. He'd rather let you die naturally and write whatever conclusions he wants. So we'd need to move me off station. Impossible. The security required to transport the last dire sept would involve 12 ships and 100 soldiers. Unless they think you're already dead. Iris pulled up schematics on her tablet. The biosphere dome. It's maintained at minimal power, barely monitored. If there was an accident during authorized research, they'd declare me dead and dispose of the body. Strand's eyes brightened with understanding. And a body could be taken anywhere for proper disposal procedures. Hayes has connections to the Resistance. They have ships, safe locations, the equipment we'd need. Iris looked at Strand directly. But this is insane. Even talking about it is probably treason. Treason implies loyalty to legitimate authority. Strand's voice was gentle. The assembly isn't legitimate. They're just powerful. There's a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, Iris carefully built her case. She requested authorization to study Strand's flight mechanics in the biosphere dome. Pohl was suspicious but agreed. The data would be valuable, and with proper security, the risk was minimal. She scheduled maintenance cycles that would create brief surveillance gaps. She coordinated with Hayes on extraction protocols that wouldn't trigger automated alerts. And she talked with Strand about what death meant. The dire sept believe consciousness is motion, he told her during one session. Not physical motion, but the motion of thought, of purpose, of change. When we stop moving, truly stop, that's when we're dead. And you've been moving this whole time? Even in the cage? I've been waiting. Waiting is a kind of motion. Strand looked at his clipped wings. But I'd like to really move one more time before the end. Feel the air again, even artificial air. Would that be possible? Iris felt her throat tighten. Yes, I'll make sure of it. The night before the scheduled biosphere session, Iris couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the ways the plan could fail. If Pohl got suspicious, if the equipment malfunctioned, if the Resistance couldn't extract them in time, if Strand changed his mind. But morning came, and with it, the point of no return. Pohl met her at the transport corridor. This is highly irregular, Dr. Webb. The subject has never left containment in 60 years. The data on flight mechanics could be invaluable, Iris said, keeping her voice steady. Understanding how a species with his physiology evolved could inform xenobiology for decades. Pohl's patterns shifted with doubt, but he nodded. Lieutenant Hayes will supervise security. 1 hour, no more. The transport of Strand's containment unit to the biosphere took 30 minutes. The dome itself was enormous, designed decades ago for atmospheric studies. Plants grew wild inside, and the ceiling could simulate weather patterns. It hadn't been used for research in years. When they activated the field release, Strand emerged slowly. He was even larger outside the cell, his presence filling the space. Hayes and 2 other guards stayed near the entrance, hands on weapons they probably knew were useless. 1 hour. Pole's voice crackled over the comm. Make it count. Iris looked at Strand, and in his luminous eyes, she saw understanding. They both knew what came next. They both knew this was goodbye disguised as research. Show me how your people flew, she said softly. And Strand, who had been caged for 60 years, who had watched his entire species die, who had chosen to wait in darkness for a chance to mean something, Strand spread his broken wings and prepared to move one final time. Strand's wings caught the artificial light like stained glass. Even damaged and scarred as they were, he stretched them carefully, testing range of motion he hadn't used in decades. Iris watched as he tilted his head back, tasting the recycled air of the biosphere dome as if it were fresh wind from an open sky. It hurts, he said quietly, but I'd forgotten how much I missed the hurting. Iris activated the dome's weather systems. Slowly, carefully, air currents began to flow. The dome could simulate everything from gentle breezes to storm winds, all controlled from her tablet. She started with the gentlest setting, barely enough to move the leaves on the neglected plants growing wild inside. Strand stepped forward, then jumped. His wings beat once, twice, catching air that shouldn't have been enough to lift something so massive. He rose perhaps 2 meters before his damaged physiology forced him back down. But for those seconds, he flew. Hayes watched from the entrance, his hand no longer on his weapon. Even the guards seemed transfixed. None of them had ever seen a dire sept do more than pace in a cage. This was different. This was witnessing something the galaxy thought extinct. More wind, Strand called, landing heavily. I need more. Iris increased the airflow. The dome's systems hummed louder, creating thermal columns and updrafts. Strand launched again, this time catching a current that carried him higher. His wings struggled with the motion. Muscles atrophied from 60 years of disuse fighting to remember their purpose. He climbed in awkward spirals, each wing beat visible effort. But he was flying. The dire sept called this sky freedom, Strand said, circling overhead. The word doesn't translate properly. It means the moment between ground and stars when nothing holds you except your own will. We believed sky freedom was the truest form of existence. Iris watched him spiral higher, and something in her chest ached. This creature, this being who had endured decades of imprisonment, who had chosen to stay caged to protect species he'd never met, he deserved this. Deserved these stolen moments of genuine freedom before the end. Iris! Hayes's voice came through her earpiece, quiet and urgent. Pole is watching the feeds. He's asking questions about why you're running the weather systems. Tell him it's part of the research protocol. Flight mechanics require active flight. He's not buying it. He's on his way here. Strand must have heard through his own translator because he descended rapidly, landing beside Iris with surprising grace. Time's up, isn't it? Not yet. We still have no more time for maybes. Strand moved to the center of the dome. If we're doing this, it has to be now. Before Pole arrives. Before second thoughts creep in. Iris looked at Hayes. The lieutenant nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. He spoke into his comm, giving orders that would create confusion, that would jam surveillance for critical minutes, that would make what happened next look like an accident until it was too late to stop. The window's crystal ceiling, Strand said, studying the dome's structure. It's reinforced, but not against internal impact. If I hit it right, you'll bring security down on us immediately, Iris said. Exactly. Chaos is cover. Strand looked at her with those luminous eyes. Once I'm through, Hayes and his people get you to the medical bay. The extraction equipment is already there, yes? The Resistance moved it 2 days ago, hidden in supply crates marked for bioresearch. Then we have everything we need except courage. Strand crouched, preparing to jump. Tell me the truth. Are you afraid? Iris thought about that. About what came next. About the galaxy-spanning consequences of what they were about to do. Terrified. Good. Fear means you understand what matters. Strand launched himself upward with every ounce of strength remaining in his damaged body. His wings beat once, twice, carrying him toward the dome's ceiling with desperate speed. He hit the crystal barrier like a meteor. The impact shattered not just the ceiling, but the illusion of control the assembly had maintained for 60 years. Alarms screamed. Emergency bulkheads began slamming shut throughout the station. Guards rushed toward the biosphere from every direction. And in the chaos, Strand fell back through the broken ceiling, Wings streaming blood, consciousness fading but still clinging to purpose. Hayes and his team moved with practiced precision. Iris ran to Strand's side, checking for, what? Fatal injuries? He'd intentionally nearly killed himself. This was always going to be ugly. But he was still breathing, still alive enough for what came next. Medical emergency, Hayes barked into his comm. Subject critically injured. Transporting to containment medical bay immediately. They loaded Strand onto an emergency transport platform. His weight made the anti-grav generators whine, but they held. As they rushed through corridors toward the medical bay, Iris could hear Pole shouting orders, demanding explanations, threatening consequences. None of it mattered anymore. The medical bay doors locked behind them, sealed by Hayes' security override. The resistance members who'd been posing as maintenance workers for weeks revealed themselves, pulling out the neural extraction equipment they'd smuggled aboard piece by piece. How long do we have? Iris asked, already helping connect sensors to Strand's skull. 10 minutes before they override the door locks, one of the resistance members said. His name was Porter, and he was human but had been living off Earth for 20 years. Maybe 15 if we're lucky. Not enough time for full extraction, another voice said. This was Dr. Nari, a Thessan who'd defected from Assembly Medical Services 6 months ago. We need at least 30 minutes for complete neural mapping. Then we don't get complete, Strand said, his voice weak but clear. Get what you can. The core memories, the war, the pacification, the truth about what the Assembly really is. Strand, Iris began. No arguments. No delays. His eyes found hers. I've been waiting 60 years for this. Don't make me wait any longer. Nari worked with incredible speed, connecting the neural pathways, initializing the transfer protocols. The equipment hummed to life, reading Strand's consciousness in ways that made the monitors flicker with incomprehensible data streams, memories translated into code, experiences compressed into transmittable information. Beginning extraction, Nari said. Subject should remain conscious as long as possible. The active neural patterns transfer more cleanly. Strand's body tensed as the process began. Iris held his massive head, offering what comfort she could to someone experiencing the technological translation of their entire existence. His eyes never left her face. Tell me about Earth, he said, his voice starting to fade. One more time. Tell me about the wild places. So Iris did. She told him about mountains that touched clouds and oceans deeper than any species had fully explored. She told him about storms that raged across continents and animals that had survived millions of years of evolution. She told him about humans who refused to stay in safe places, who always pushed toward horizons even when everyone said it was too dangerous. We're stubborn, she said, tears running freely now. We don't listen to authority very well. We ask too many questions. We break rules that don't make sense. Good, Strand whispered. Stay stubborn. Stay questioning. Stay free. The door behind them groaned under Pole's attempts to override the lock. 3 minutes had passed. Then 5, then 10. The data stream from Strand's mind flowed into storage drives that would be scattered across 100 human ships within hours. Impossible for the Assembly to completely suppress. Core memories extracted, Nari announced. We have the war. We have the pacification protocols. We have everything. Then we're done, Strand said. His luminescence was fading, his breath shallow. Get Iris out. Get the data out. Make sure it means something. It will, Iris promised. I swear it will. One more thing. Strand's eyes brightened briefly with effort. The Dire Sept believed that consciousness is motion. As long as these memories exist, as long as they move from person to person, species to species, I'm still moving. Still free. Tell them that. Tell anyone who'll listen. The door lock broke. Assembly guards poured in, weapons raised. But they were too late. The extraction was complete, the data already uploading to Hayes' encrypted network, spreading like wildfire through channels the Assembly couldn't jam fast enough. Pole entered last, his patterns blazing with rage. What have you done? Told the truth, Iris said, still holding Strand's fading form. Something the Assembly stopped doing centuries ago. Strand died in her arms exactly 14 seconds later. The monitors flatlined. The greatest apex predator the galaxy had ever known, philosopher, warrior, artist, prisoner, became still at last. But the motion he'd spoken of, the transfer of truth and memory and purpose that continued, Even as Pol called for Iris's arrest, even as guards restrained Hayes and the other resistance members, the data was already reaching Earth, reaching the human colonies, reaching other species who'd been waiting for proof that their cages weren't for their own good. Strand had spent 60 years waiting to move again. Now in death he flew further than wings could ever carry him, and the galaxy would never be the same. Assembly security transferred Iris to a detention cell 3 levels below the station's main ring. The cell was small, sterile, and utterly silent. They'd taken everything from her except basic clothing. No tablet, no communication device, no way to know if Strand's data had really made it out, or if the assembly had somehow stopped the transmission at the last second. She spent the first 2 days alone with her thoughts and her grief. Strand's death played on repeat in her memory. Not the moment of death itself, but the moments before. The way his eyes had brightened one last time. The way he'd asked about Earth's wild places. The way he'd made his death mean something when so many of his people had died meaningless deaths in assembly purges. On the 3rd day, Pol visited. His patterns were different from before. Where they'd been controlled and tight, now they swirled with something that looked like genuine concern. He sat across from her in the cell's single chair, maintaining careful distance. "The data is out," he said without preamble. "We tried to contain it. Tried to jam transmissions, block networks, suppress distribution. It didn't matter. Humans are remarkably good at spreading information when motivated. So, you can't stop it. We've known that. Since Hayes activated his network protocols, Pol's pattern shifted to something sadder. Did you really think you were the first? In 4,000 years of assembly authority, dozens of species have tried to reveal the truth about our methods. All of them failed. Maybe because none of them had Strand's testimony. None of them had direct neural extraction from someone who lived through your genocide. Pacification. Pol corrected automatically, then stopped. Though I suppose the distinction doesn't matter much to the species that died, does it? Iris leaned forward. Why are you here? To gloat? To threaten? Neither. I came to explain. Pol stood pacing the small cell. The assembly was formed 4,000 years ago after a war that nearly destroyed galactic civilization. 3 apex predator species fought for dominance, and billions died before exhaustion forced a truce. The assembly was created to prevent that from ever happening again, by eliminating any species strong enough to fight, by creating a system where fighting wasn't necessary, where every species had protection, resources, guidance. Pol's patterns flickered. It worked, Dr. Webb. For 4,000 years we've maintained unprecedented peace. The cost has been high, but war's cost is higher. You don't get to decide that for everyone. Someone has to decide. Someone has to maintain order. Without the assembly, the galaxy would descend into chaos. Pol turned to face her. I know you see me as a tyrant, but I genuinely believe what we do is necessary. The dire sept would have become conquerors if we'd let them grow unchecked. Humanity will too, eventually. Your species has barely been spacefaring for a century, and you already chafe at every restriction. Because the restrictions aren't for our protection, they're for your control. Can those two things not be the same? Pol sat again, his pattern shifting to something that might have been exhaustion. You released Strand's memories, fine. Billions of beings now have access to his testimony. But what do you think will happen next? Revolution. Other species will see the truth and demand freedom. Some will. Most won't. Pol leaned back. Most species in the assembly have been members for centuries. They've grown comfortable, safe. They don't remember what freedom cost, only what it might cost to reclaim. Your data will cause disruption, certainly. Perhaps even minor conflicts. But in a decade, maybe 2, everything will return to normal. You sound very certain. Because I've seen it before. Every generation, someone discovers the truth. Every generation, there's outrage and protest. And every generation, the comfort of stability wins out over the risk of freedom. Pol stood to leave. You'll spend several months here while we determine appropriate sentencing. I suspect you'll face exile from assembly space at minimum. Perhaps more depending on how much damage your data causes. Use the time to consider whether freeing one species' memories was worth destroying your own future. After he left, Iris sat in the darkness and wondered if he was right. Maybe the truth wasn't enough. Maybe species really did choose safety over sovereignty, once they'd tasted peace. Maybe Strand had died for nothing. But then on the 5th day, everything changed. The cell's communication panel activated, something that should have been impossible in a detention facility. Hayes's face appeared on the screen, grainy but unmistakable. "This is going to be a short transmission before they trace it," he said quickly. "Just wanted you to know, Earth saw the data, all of it. And we're not staying quiet." The screen flickered, showing images from across human space. Protests on New Perth, demonstrations on the colony worlds, the entire human delegation walking out of an assembly council session, and most surprisingly, images from non-human worlds. Other species inspired by Strand's testimony, questioning their own circumstances. "It's not a revolution yet," Hayes said, "but it's starting. The assembly can't suppress this because too many people saw it simultaneously. They can't arrest everyone." His image glitched. "We're coming for you. Stay alive until we can extract." The transmission cut off. Iris sat back, something fierce and bright burning in her chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. Or just the knowledge that Strand's death had rippled outward in ways Pol couldn't predict or control. 2 weeks later, the detention facility's alarms began screaming. Iris had learned to differentiate the station's alert patterns during her imprisonment. Fire alarms sounded different from decompression warnings, which sounded different from security breaches. This was the latter, loud and insistent, accompanied by the thud of emergency bulkheads sealing throughout the station. Her cell door unlocked. Hayes stood in the corridor, breathing hard, weapon drawn but lowered. Behind him were 3 other humans she didn't recognize and one Thessan, Dr. Nari, who'd helped with Strand's extraction. "We have approximately 4 minutes before assembly security locks down this section," Hayes said. "After that, we're trapped. Can you run?" Iris discovered she could run very well when properly motivated. They sprinted through corridors that twisted with the station's rotation, past sealed doorways and through maintenance tunnels that Hayes navigated from memory. Twice they encountered security patrols. Both times, Hayes's team incapacitated the guards with weapons that stunned rather than killed. They weren't murderers, just very determined. "Where are we going?" Iris gasped as they climbed a vertical access ladder. "Docking Bay 7. We have a ship waiting." Hayes pulled himself up behind her. "The resistance isn't just humans anymore." After Strand's testimony spread, dozens of species started coordinating. "We've got ships, safe harbors, even some sympathetic assembly members feeding us intel." They reached the docking bay with 90 seconds to spare. The ship waiting for them was small, sleek, and flying colors Iris didn't recognize. Not human, not any assembly species she knew. When they boarded, the pilot turned and revealed features that made Iris stop in her tracks. She was young, maybe equivalent to a human teenager. Her scales were lighter than Strand's, but unmistakably similar. Her wings, though small and still growing, bore the same structural patterns. "You're—" Iris couldn't finish the sentence. "Dire Sept," the young pilot confirmed. Her voice carried Strand's musical quality. "My name is Whisper of Distant Thunder. I was in stasis when the assembly destroyed our world. The Resistance found me 3 years ago." She initiated launch sequences. Strand's memories included coordinates for other stasis sites. "We've recovered 47 of my people so far, more being located every week." The ship launched as station defenses came online. Weapons fire tracked them, but Whisper maneuvered with instinctive grace that made evasion look effortless. Within minutes, they'd jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving Research Station Olympus and its furious administrators far behind. Iris sat in the passenger compartment, trying to process everything. Strand wasn't the last Dire Sept. His species wasn't extinct. The memories he'd died to preserve had led to recovering survivors he'd never known existed. "He knew, didn't he?" she said to Hayes. "Strand knew there might be others in stasis." "We think so." The coordinates were buried deep in his memories, encoded in a way that looked like random neural patterns. "But once we had full access, we found them." Hayes smiled tiredly. "He couldn't tell us directly. If the assembly had known there were survivors, they'd have hunted down every stasis site and finished what they started. But by dying, by making his memories our memories, he protected his species one last time." The ship traveled for 3 days, jumping between systems using routes that weren't on any assembly star charts. They passed through territories held by species Iris had never heard of, met resistance members from a dozen different worlds, and slowly assembled a picture of what Strand's sacrifice had created. It wasn't a revolution, not yet, but it was something. A coalition of species that had seen the truth and decided they wouldn't accept cages anymore. Humans formed the core because humanity was young enough to still be furious about restrictions, but they weren't alone. The Thessan had sent observers. The Koran had begun quiet military preparations. Even some Varani, Pol's own species, had defected to provide intelligence about assembly operations. The data Strand had died to preserve was becoming something he'd never quite predicted, not just evidence of crimes, but a rallying point, a symbol of resistance that crossed species barriers. They arrived at a hidden station in an unmapped system. The station was massive, clearly constructed over years by multiple species working in secret. Ships of every configuration docked at its bays. The corridors mixed architectural styles from dozens of worlds, and in the station's central hub, Iris saw something that made her stop and stare. A memorial, not just for Strand, but for all the Diresept who'd died, for all the species the assembly had pacified. Names carved in languages Iris couldn't read, images of beings she'd never known. But at the memorial center, easily visible from every angle, was a statue. Strand, wings spread, frozen in eternal flight. Beneath it, engraved in 40 languages including English, were his last words. Consciousness is motion. As long as truth moves from person to person, we remain free. Iris stood before the statue, tears streaming freely. Hayes stood beside her in respectful silence. Around them, beings from a dozen species went about their work, building something new from the ruins of assembly authority. He would have liked this, Iris said finally. Not the statue. He'd probably find that embarrassing. But this, she gestured at the station, the ships, the coalition of free species. This he would have understood. He made it possible, Hayes said quietly. One creature alone in a cage waiting 60 years for the right moment. And when that moment came, he didn't hesitate. Whisper of distant thunder approached, her young face serious. The council wishes to meet you. They're planning the next phase of resistance and they want human input. Iris took a deep breath. She thought about Strand's question from months ago. What would you do if you were human and you saw the trap? The Diresept had chosen to fight and lost everything. But maybe there was a third option they'd never seen. Maybe the answer wasn't fighting alone but fighting together. Building coalitions. Spreading truth. Making cages irrelevant by teaching entire civilizations to refuse them. Tell them I'm ready, Iris said. And somewhere in the vast dark between stars, in memories copied and shared across countless minds, Strand's consciousness continued its motion. Still teaching, still witnessing, still in his own way, flying free. 5 years after Strand's death, Iris stood in the human delegation chamber on Earth and watched the vote count scroll across displays that connected to every human colony in known space. The question was simple. Does humanity accept permanent technological and territorial restrictions as a condition of continued assembly membership? The answer came back with 93% agreement. Nombert Earth officially withdrew from the Galactic Assembly at 1400 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. Within hours, 6 other species announced similar withdrawals. The coalition Strand's testimony had sparked wasn't just holding together, it was growing. Pol's prediction had been wrong. The truth hadn't faded into comfortable ignorance. Instead, it had spread like fire through dry grass, igniting something the assembly couldn't extinguish with their usual methods. The response was swift and brutal. Assembly fleets mobilized toward human space within days. The message was clear. Submit or face the same fate as the Diresept. But this time, the calculation was different. The Diresept had stood alone against the entire galactic establishment. Humanity had allies, resources, and most importantly, preparation time. The war that followed would later be called the Schism. Not because the galaxy broke cleanly in two, but because the simple binary of assembly versus free species proved impossible to maintain. Some assembly members supported the coalition quietly, while officially remaining neutral. Others fractured internally, with factions choosing different sides. The clean, controlled order the assembly had maintained for 4,000 years crumbled into something messy, chaotic, and undeniably alive. Iris watched it unfold from her position as humanity's chief liaison to coalition species. She'd never wanted to be a politician or military coordinator, but Strand's death had transformed her into something more than a xenobiologist. She'd become a symbol, the human who'd risked everything to free one creature's truth. And symbols had responsibilities she couldn't ignore. The first major battle happened near the colony world of New Perth. Assembly forces arrived, expecting humanity to surrender when faced with overwhelming firepower. Instead, they found a combined fleet of human, Thessan, Coran, and Dire Sept ships waiting in coordinated defensive positions. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended in stalemate, but the symbolism was unmistakable. The Assembly could no longer assume automatic victory over species they'd dismissed as manageable. Iris coordinated with coalition leaders throughout the conflict, translating between species that had never worked together before, finding common ground where none should exist. It was exhausting, frustrating work. Different species had different priorities, different fears, different lines they wouldn't cross, but somehow held together by the shared memory of Strand's testimony, they made it work. The war lasted 18 months, not because either side achieved decisive victory, but because the cost became unsustainable for everyone involved. The Assembly lost control of 7 major sectors. The Coalition lost millions of lives defending newly claimed territories. Neither outcome resembled triumph. Peace negotiations happened on neutral ground, mediated by species that had somehow remained genuinely neutral throughout the conflict. Iris represented humanity alongside a dozen other Coalition delegates. Across the table sat Assembly officials, including, surprisingly, Pol. He looked older, his patterns more muted than she remembered. When their eyes met, something complicated passed between them, not forgiveness but perhaps understanding. The treaty that emerged satisfied no one completely, which suggested it was probably fair. The Assembly maintained control over core systems but acknowledged the right of species to withdraw from membership. The Coalition gained independence but agreed to mutual defense pacts and trade regulations that prevented total isolation. The galaxy transformed from one unified authority into something more complicated. Multiple power centers, competing philosophies, genuine diversity instead of enforced uniformity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly stable. But it was real. After the treaty signing, Pol approached Iris in a quiet corridor. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Not about everything. The Assembly did maintain peace for millennia. But you were right that peace bought through oppression isn't worth the price." "Strand was right," Iris corrected. "I just listened." "No, you did more than listen. You acted." Pol's pattern shifted to something that might have been respect. "The Assembly is changing. Slowly, grudgingly, but changing. Some of my people are even beginning to question whether we truly needed to pacify the Dire Sept, or if we just feared them. That's your doing. And his." After Pol left, Iris remained in the corridor, thinking about everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. The galaxy was freer than it had been. But freedom came with complications the Assembly had suppressed for centuries. Border disputes, resource conflicts, philosophical disagreements that occasionally turned violent. All the messy reality of genuine independence. But Strand had never promised that freedom would be easy. Only that it would be worth it. 10 years after the treaty, Iris led a delegation to the Dire Sept homeworld. The planet had been glassed during the Assembly's pacification, its surface reduced to lifeless stone. But deep underground, protected by layers of radiation-shielded rock, the Resistance had found what Strand's memories had promised: stasis facilities containing thousands of Dire Sept eggs and genetic material. The restoration project took another 5 years. Species from across the Coalition contributed technology, resources, and labor to rebuild what the Assembly had destroyed. Atmospheric processors slowly made the air breathable again. Terraforming equipment coaxed dead soil back to life. Genetic specialists carefully brought Dire Sept eggs out of stasis, timing the hatchings to ensure proper population distribution. Iris was there when the first egg hatched in 400 years. The hatchling was small, no larger than a human child, with scales that caught light in rainbow patterns. Its wings were tiny and folded against its back, but when it opened its eyes and looked around at the gathered observers from a dozen species, something ancient and powerful looked back. Whisper of distant thunder. Now fully grown and serving as the Dire Sept representative to the Coalition Council, held the hatchling carefully. She spoke to it in their native language, words that hadn't been heard aloud in centuries, teaching it sounds that carried history and hope in equal measure. "What will you name it?" someone asked. Whisper looked at Iris, then at the gathered delegates, then back at the hatchling. Strand remembered, she said, so that every time someone speaks their name, they'll ask why and we'll tell the story again. More hatchlings emerged over the following years. The dire sept population grew slowly, carefully under the protection of coalition forces and international agreement. They weren't restored to their former empire. The galaxy had moved past empires, at least for now. But they were alive. They were learning. They were flying free under their own sky again. Iris returned to Earth eventually, ready to resume her life as a xenobiologist. But she discovered she couldn't simply return to academic research. Strand's death had changed her in ways that couldn't be undone. She'd seen too much, learned too much, felt too much responsibility for the changes she'd helped create. Instead, she established an institute dedicated to preserving the testimonies of pacified species. Not just the dire sept, but all the others the Assembly had eliminated or suppressed throughout its history. She traveled to ruins of dead civilizations, recovered fragments of lost cultures, and slowly reconstructed histories that had been deliberately erased. The Assembly protested, naturally, called it inflammatory, provocative, dangerous, but they couldn't stop it, because the Coalition's independence meant the truth no longer needed Assembly approval to exist. 20 years after Strand's death, Iris returned to the memorial station where his statue stood. The station had grown from a hidden resistance base into a major coalition hub, hosting millions of residents from dozens of species. But the memorial remained unchanged, carefully preserved at the station's heart. She stood before Strand's statue as she had so many times before, but this time she wasn't alone. Hayes stood beside her, retired from military service but still active in resistance-turned-coalition politics. Whisper of Distant Thunder was there too, along with her first clutch of hatchlings. 5 young dire sept learning about the being who'd made their existence possible. "Do they understand?" Iris asked quietly. "What he sacrificed?" "They're beginning to," Whisper said. "Understanding sacrifice takes time. Takes living enough to know what you'd die for." One of the hatchlings, bolder than the others, approached the statue and placed a small clawed hand against the carved stone. "He was alone," the young dire sept said, speaking careful English. "For 60 years alone in a cage." "Why did he stay?" Iris knelt beside the hatchling. "Because he knew that one day someone would listen, and that one truth shared at the right moment could change everything." "Did it? Change everything?" "Look around," Iris said, gesturing at the bustling station, at the mix of species working together, at the freedom represented by every ship coming and going without Assembly permission. "What do you think?" The hatchling considered that, then nodded slowly. "I think he's still moving. Like he said, still teaching us." "Yes," Iris agreed. "Yes, he is." That evening, alone in her quarters, Iris recorded a final entry in her personal logs. She'd kept them throughout everything: the imprisonment, the war, the rebuilding. Now nearing the end of her natural lifespan, she wanted to leave one last testimony. "I approached an isolated dragon thinking I was there to study him," she said to the recording. "I believed he was the one in the cage, but I was wrong about who was trapped and who was free. Strand knew he was imprisoned, understood it completely, and chose every day how to respond to that reality. I was the one living in a cage I couldn't see. The cage of ignorance, of comfortable lies, of systems that controlled me by convincing me I was already free. Strand taught me that cages are only as real as our acceptance of them. He showed me that one being, properly positioned, properly timed, properly willing to sacrifice, can shatter empires built on fear, not through violence or conquest, but through the simple, radical act of telling the truth. The galaxy isn't perfect now. We still have wars, conflicts, species that hate each other for reasons both ancient and new. But it's honest. It's real. And every species that wants freedom has the chance to claim it, even if that freedom is hard and dangerous and uncertain. That's Strand's legacy. Not peace. Not safety. Not comfort. Just the honest choice between genuine freedom and comfortable oppression, with no lies about what either one costs. And if you're watching this recording someday wondering whether truth is worth the price of telling it, remember the dragon who waited 60 years in a cage for the right moment to fly free. Remember that his wings were broken, his body scarred, his species nearly extinct. And remember that none of that stopped him from moving forward, from fighting back, from refusing to accept that cages are inevitable. Consciousness is motion. As long as we keep moving, keep questioning, keep refusing the comfortable lies that make imprisonment feel like protection, we're free. That's what he taught me. That's what I'm teaching you. Don't accept cages. Don't believe anyone who says oppression is for your own good. And when you meet someone trapped in a cage, whether literal or metaphorical, approach them. Listen to them. Learn from them. Because sometimes the most imprisoned person in the room is the only one who truly understands freedom. Iris ended the recording and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there on a restored world, young Diresept were learning to fly. Somewhere, coalition species were arguing about policies and treaties and all the messy complexity of genuine independence. Somewhere, the assembly was slowly, grudgingly learning that authority based on fear couldn't survive indefinitely. And everywhere, in memories copied and shared across countless minds, a dragon continued to fly. She thought about the title that had somehow attached itself to her story. She approached the isolated dragon, but only one of them was truly caged. The truth was deeper than she'd first understood. Yes, she'd been the one truly caged by ignorance, but more importantly, neither of them had stayed caged. Both had broken free, Strand through meaningful death, Iris through purposeful action. And in breaking free, they'd created cracks in every cage the assembly had ever built. Because that was the final truth Strand had taught her. Cages are only permanent if everyone believes they are. The moment someone refuses to accept imprisonment, the moment they tell the truth about what's really happening, the moment they move forward despite the cost, that's when cages start crumbling. And once that motion begins, once that truth starts spreading, even the strongest cage in the galaxy can't hold forever. Iris Webb died peacefully at age 97, surrounded by friends from a dozen species, having lived to see the galaxy transformed by one dragon's sacrifice and one woman's willingness to listen. Her last words, witnessed and recorded by those present, were simple. Tell them about the dragon who taught us to fly. And they did. For generations to come, they told the story of Strand and Iris, of the creature who waited 60 years to move one final time, and the human who approached his cage without fear. They told it to hatchlings learning their wings, to young humans learning their history, to every species that needed to understand that freedom isn't granted by those in power. It's claimed by those brave enough to refuse captivity. The story became legend. The legend became truth. And the truth kept moving, kept flying, kept breaking cages. Exactly as Strand had always known it would.